Don't undervalue it. After Harrison left, Webb stood for a moment, looking at what they'd created. For skeletal structures, steel ribs reaching toward the sky, geometric precision imposed on organic chaos. It was like cathedral architecture, he thought. The Gothic builders had understood arches too, had known that a curved stone could bear weight that would crush a straight beam. "All right," he called. "Break's over. Let's put some skin on these bones." Scene 8, The Metal Skin. The corrugated steel panels were works of art in their own way, sheets of metal pressed into a regular wave pattern, the corrugations running lengthwise to provide rigidity. Each panel was about 3 feet wide and 8 feet long, with holes punched along the edges for bolts. The panels overlapped like shingles, each one covering the edge of the previous one, creating a weatherproof seal. The corrugations fit together, the ridges of one panel nesting into the valleys of the next. It was simple, brilliant, and it required precision. "We start at the bottom and work up," Webb explained, holding up a panel. Each panel overlaps the one before it by 2 inches. The corrugations interlock. We bolt through both panels into the purlins. The overlap sheds water downward. If we get the pattern wrong, water will flow backward into the building. "How many panels per hut?" Peterson asked. Webb did quick math. "About 50. 25 per side. Each panel takes maybe 10 bolts. That's 500 bolts per hut, 2,000 total." "Jesus." "Yeah. So we work in teams of 3. One person positions the panel, one person holds it while the third person bolts it down. We rotate positions so nobody's arms give out. We work from both sides simultaneously, keep the structure balanced." Questions? There were none. Everyone was too tired for questions. They started paneling Hut 1 at 1,215 hours. The first panel was the hardest, getting it positioned correctly, making sure it was level, ensuring the overlap was right. Miller held it in place while Peterson and Webb bolted it down. The bolt gun was heavy, awkward, and each bolt had to be tightened enough to seal the connection but not so tight that it crushed the metal. The first panel took 8 minutes. "Too slow," Webb muttered. "We need to be faster." The second panel took 6 minutes. The third took 5. By the 10th panel, they'd established a rhythm: position, hold, bolt, move. Position, hold, bolt, move. The panels clinked together with a satisfying metallic sound, the corrugations interlocking, the structure becoming solid. Around them, the other teams were working on their own huts. The sound of bolt guns and the ring of metal on metal echoed across the clearing. It sounded like a factory, like industry, like civilization imposing itself on the jungle. By 1400 hours, Hut 1 was half-paneled. The lower portion of the arch was now covered in gleaming corrugated steel, water-resistant, shrapnel-deflecting, solid. You could see the transformation happening in real time, from skeleton to structure, from concept to reality. But they were still behind schedule. And there was a new problem. "Chief," Chen called from Hut 3. "We've got a panel that doesn't fit." Webb jogged over, his legs protesting. Chen was holding a panel that was clearly wrong, the corrugations didn't match the ones next to it. The pattern was reversed. "Where did this come from?" Webb demanded. "Same crate as the others, Chief. But look, the holes are in different positions. It's like it's from a different manufacturer or something." Webb swore. He'd feared this. The panels had come from salvage, from different sources. Not everything was standardized. He examined the mismatched panel carefully. The overall dimensions were right, but the details were wrong. "Can we flip it? Use it on the other side?" "Already tried. Doesn't work. The corrugation pattern has to run consistently or water will leak." Webb thought fast. "How many mismatched panels do we have?" Chen checked the remaining uninstalled panels. Looks like maybe 6. They're all from the same sub-batch. Okay. We use them for the end walls instead of the curved sections. The end walls are flat, the corrugation pattern doesn't matter as much there. We'll make it work. Crisis averted. Barely. At 1530 hours, the sky opened up. The rain came suddenly, as it always did in the tropics, one moment overcast, the next moment a deluge. Water poured down in sheets, turning the world gray and indistinct. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. Keep working. Webb shouted over the roar of rain on metal. We're already wet. We've got light. Keep going. The rain actually helped in one way. It washed away some of the mud coating everything, made the bolt holes easier to see. But it also made the panels slippery, harder to grip. And it was cold, which seemed impossible in the tropics, but the rain was pulling heat out of their bodies through wet clothing. Men started shivering despite the exertion. Rodriguez. Webb called. Get the shelter tarp set up. We need a dry area where people can rotate through, warm up, dry off for a few minutes. On it, Chief. They kept working through the rain. Panel by panel, bolt by bolt, the structures grew solid. By 1700 hours, as the rain finally slackened, Hut 1 was completely paneled. The curved surface gleamed wet but intact, water streaming off it in rivulets, finding the natural drainage paths created by the corrugations. Webb stood inside the completed shell, looking up at the curved ceiling. It was dark inside, shadowy, but it was dry. The rain drummed on the metal overhead, a sound like distant thunder, but inside was a pocket of dryness, of shelter, of civilization. It works, he said, almost surprised. It actually works. Kowalski appeared beside him, equally soaked, equally exhausted. Never doubted it for a minute, Chief. Liar. Yeah, okay, I totally doubted it. But look at this. Kowalski gestured around the interior. We built this. Us. With hand tools and determination and probably some divine intervention. We built a building in the middle of a jungle in the middle of a war. We built a quarter of what we need, Webb corrected. And we're out of time. Status on the other huts? Hut 2 is about 90% paneled. 3 is maybe 70%. 4 is behind, maybe 50%. Webb checked his watch. 1715 hours. They'd been working for almost 12 hours straight. His men were running on fumes. But the wounded were still lying in mud outside. And the storm was still coming. We pushed through, Webb decided. Team 1, you're most experienced now. Split up, half to help Hut 3, half to Hut 4. Team 2, finish your paneling, then start on end walls. Let's move. Scene 9, the walls rise. The end walls were different from the curved panels. They were flat structures, requiring framing, more careful carpentry, spaces for doors and windows. Each end wall had to be custom-built to fit the exact dimensions of the Quonset Hut semicircular opening. Webb's team tackled the end wall for Hut 1 while the paneling continued on the other structures. They had lumber, water-damaged but usable, and they had the mismatched panels Chen had identified earlier. We frame it like a regular wall, Webb explained, but in a semicircular shape. Bottom plate, top plate, studs at 18-inch spacing. Then we nail the corrugated panels to the outside of the frame. Door goes here in the center, windows on either side. They worked by the light of battery-powered lanterns now. The sun had set somewhere behind the perpetual overcast, and the jungle was dark, full of sounds that might be animals or might be something more dangerous. Did you hear that? Miller whispered, hand dropping to his rifle. Hear what? Sounded like. A flare burst overhead, bathing everything in harsh magnesium light. Seconds later, the air raid sirens began to wail. Incoming, someone screamed. Take cover. But there was nowhere to take cover. The bunkers were hundreds of yards away. The only shelter was into the huts. Webb shouted. Everyone inside. Now. Men ran through the darkness, splashing through mud, diving through the open ends of the Quonset huts. Webb pushed Miller ahead of him, then threw himself inside Hut 1 just as the first bombs hit. The sound was indescribable, a shrieking whistle followed by a crump that you felt in your chest cavity, in your bones, in your teeth. The ground shook. Shrapnel whined overhead, clanging off the metal panels with sounds like demonic hail. Inside Hut 1, 30 men huddled in darkness. Someone was praying. Someone else was crying. Webb could hear his own breathing, harsh and fast, his heart hammering. Another bomb. Closer. The Quonset hut rang like a bell, vibrating, but it held. The arch shape distributed the shock wave. The corrugated steel deflected the shrapnel. Through the open end, Webb could see fires burning in the jungle. Another flare burst overhead, and in its light he saw a Japanese bomber silhouetted against the clouds, turning for another pass. American anti-aircraft fire erupted from positions around the perimeter, tracers drawing orange lines across the sky. The bomber jinked, dropped its remaining ordnance early, and climbed away. The bombs hit the beach, sending up huge geysers of black sand. Then it was over. 5 minutes of hell, then silence except for the crackling of fires and distant shouting. Webb waited 60 seconds, then, sound off. Anyone hit? Down the line, voices, okay. Good. Fine, Chief. Scared shitless but intact. No casualties. Webb crawled to the end of the hut and looked out. Remarkably, the damage to their work site was minimal. One bomb had cratered the edge of the clearing, taking out a section of jungle but missing the buildings. The Quonset huts stood intact, their curved surfaces unmarked except for a few small dents where shrapnel had struck. They held, Kowalski said beside him, voice full of wonder. The huts took shrapnel and they held. Arch design, Webb said, and he was surprised his voice was steady. Distributes the force. No flat surfaces for blast waves to catch. The corrugations add rigidity. He realized he was lecturing and stopped. Let's get back to work. We lost 20 minutes. Chief, we were just bombed. And we're still alive, and we still have work to do. Everybody up. Check your sections for damage, then back to it. Incredibly, they went back to work. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the knowledge that stopping meant failure, and failure meant dead men who could have lived. By 21:30 hours, all 4 Quonset huts had their panels completely installed. 4 gleaming metal tunnels sat in the clearing, their curved surfaces reflecting lamplight. They looked alien, futuristic, completely out of place in the primitive jungle. They looked like they came from a world where things worked properly, where engineering solved problems, where human ingenuity could triumph over chaos. Now came the detailed work, end walls, doors, windows, interior finishing. Webb's crew finished the first end wall at 2,215 hours. They lifted it into place, a semicircular wall fitting perfectly into the arch opening, and bolted it to the structure. With both ends closed, Hut 1 became a complete building. An actual building. With walls and a roof and a door that could be opened and closed. Webb stepped inside and pulled the door shut. Silence. Outside, the jungle roared with insects and frogs and distant artillery. Inside, there was just the quiet sound of rain on metal, muffled and distant. It's soundproof, Kowalski said. Almost. Enough. It's shelter, Webb corrected. Real shelter. For the first time since we landed on this rock, we have a space that's ours, that's safe, that's dry. He felt something loosening in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying. They were going to make it. Against all odds, against time and weather and enemy action, they were actually going to finish. 3 more to go, he said. Let's finish this. Scene 10, the night shift. By midnight, Webb's internal clock had broken. He'd been awake for nearly 42 hours straight, running on coffee and adrenaline and something that might have been determination or might have been delusion. Around him, his men were in similar shape. Eyes red-rimmed. Movements mechanical. Conversations reduced to single words or grunts. But they kept working. Hut 2 got its end walls at 2,345 hours. Hut 3 followed at 0130. Hut 4 took longer. They'd encountered more problems with mismatched components, requiring field modifications that slowed everything down. But at 0315 hours, Rodriguez's team bolted the final end wall in place. 4 complete buildings stood in the clearing. Empty shells still, but weatherproof, solid, real. Commander Harrison appeared out of the darkness, accompanied by Commander Phillips and a team of corpsmen carrying equipment. Chief Webb, Harrison said, and even through the exhaustion Webb could hear the emotion in his voice. You did it. Against all odds, you actually did it. Buildings are up, sir, but they're not hospitals yet. We still need to install lighting, ventilation, equipment. My people will handle that, Phillips interrupted. The chief medical officer was a lean, intense man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. You've given us the structures. We'll make them functional. I've got electricians standing by to run power lines, plumbers ready to install water systems, corpsmen prepared to set up beds and medical equipment. How long? Harrison asked. To get one operational? Maybe 3 hours. All 4? By dawn, easily. Phillips was already directing his people, pointing out where power needed to go, where supply closets should be positioned. These are perfect, Webb. The arch shape means we can hang 4 bags from the ceiling supports. The curved walls mean no corners for dirt to accumulate. The corrugated steel can be sterilized easily. And the space, 576 square feet per building, that's room for 24 beds per hut, maybe more if we're efficient. Webb did quick math. 96 beds total? Closer to 100 if we're creative. That's enough for every critically wounded man on this island, with room for incoming casualties. Phillips gripped Webb's shoulder. You've saved lives today, Chief. More than you know. Webb wanted to say something meaningful, something profound, but exhaustion had reduced his vocabulary to basics. Just doing the job, sir. Bullshit, Harrison said, with unusual profanity. This was above and beyond, and we both know it. Now get your men some food and sleep. That's an order. You've earned it. Webb gathered his Seabees, scattered across the 4 hut sites, most of them simply collapsed where they stood. All right, everyone listen up. Buildings are complete. Medical Corps is taking over from here. We're standing down for 6 hours. Sleep wherever you can find dry ground. A ragged cheer went up, more exhaustion than enthusiasm. Webb found a spot inside Hut 1, where medical corpsmen were already stringing electrical cables and setting up examination tables. He sat with his back against the curved metal wall, feeling the cool steel through his soaked uniform. Kowalski slumped down beside him, pulling out a cigarette with shaking hands. Can't believe we pulled that off. I mean, seriously. No equipment, no time, getting bombed, working in mud, and we built 4 buildings. 4 actual buildings. Architecture of necessity, Webb murmured. His eyes were closing despite his best efforts to keep them open. That's what this is. When you need something badly enough, when the alternative is death, you find a way. Is that profound or just exhaustion talking? Both. They sat in silence, listening to the controlled chaos around them as the hospital came to life. Generators coughing to life. Lights flickering on. The squeak of bed frames being assembled. Low voices of corpsmen checking supplies. Chief. It was Miller, looking about 12 years old despite 3 days of beard growth. Commander Harrison says the storm's going to hit earlier than expected. Maybe 2 hours. Webb forced himself to his feet, every muscle protesting. Are the huts secure? All panels bolted down? End walls braced? Jackson did a final inspection. Says everything's solid. Then there's nothing more we can do except wait. Webb looked around at the building they'd created. If these huts can't handle a typhoon, nothing we build could. That's not reassuring, Chief. It's honest. Get some sleep, Miller. Storm or no storm, tomorrow we've got more work to do. Always more work to do. Webb lasted another 15 minutes before unconsciousness claimed him, sitting propped against the curved steel wall while medical personnel worked around him. His last thought before sleep was of the arch, that elegant curve, distributing force, channeling pressure, standing strong because it understood fundamental principles of physics. A good design, he thought, doesn't fight nature. It works with it. Then darkness. Part 3, The Storm. Scene 11, Dawn Wind. Webb woke to the sound of the universe trying to tear itself apart. The wind had arrived. He jerked upright, disoriented, not sure where he was for a confused moment. Then memory returned, Guadalcanal. The hospital. The Quonset Huts. The Quonset Huts that were now being battered by typhoon-force winds. Outside, the noise was tremendous, a roar like a freight train, punctuated by crashes as debris slammed into the buildings. The metal walls of the hut rang and sang with each gust, a sustained note like a massive organ pipe. But they were holding. Webb looked around. The interior of Hut 1 was fully functional now, rows of beds with white sheets, medical equipment hanging from ceiling supports, electric lights burning steadily from the generator outside, hopefully secured against the wind. And in those beds, wounded men slept or rested, protected from the storm that raged beyond the metal walls. Chief Webb. Commander Phillips appeared, moving between beds, checking on patients. Good, you're awake. I need you to inspect the other huts, make sure they're handling the wind. Sir, That's not a request, Chief. These buildings are your responsibility. I need to know if we should evacuate any of them. Webb pulled himself up, joints complaining, and stumbled toward the door. Opening it was a struggle, the wind pressure was enormous, trying to keep the door closed. When he finally forced it open, the storm hit him like a physical blow. Rain. Wind. Debris flying horizontally. Visibility maybe 10 feet. The roar was deafening. Webb tied a rope around his waist, someone had strung safety lines between the huts, and stepped out into hell. The wind tried to knock him down immediately. Only the rope kept him upright, kept him moving forward. Rain lashed his face, blinding him. Something, a palm frond, a piece of shrapnel, impossible to tell, whipped past his head close enough to feel the wind of its passage. He reached Hut 2 and pounded on the door. Someone opened it from inside, and Webb fell through, gasping. Status, he shouted over the wind. Holding. Kowalski shouted back. Got a little leak where the end wall meets the arch, but nothing serious. Structures solid. Any buckling? Any panel failure? Nothing. It's like the wind's going over us instead of hitting us. Webb understood. The arch design. Wind couldn't catch a flat surface because there was no flat surface. The semicircular shape divided the wind flow, sending it up and over the structure. Aerodynamics. The Quonset hut was essentially a wing lying on its side. He checked Hut 3, same story. Minor leaks, but structure sound. Hut 4 had lost a small ventilation panel that hadn't been properly secured, but Rodriguez's crew had already patched it with a spare piece of corrugated steel. By the time Webb made it back to Hut 1, he was completely soaked, exhausted, and oddly exhilarated. The storm was hitting them with everything it had, and they were surviving. The buildings he'd helped create were standing firm against nature's fury. Commander Harrison met him inside, holding a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. "Report," Harrison said simply. "All 4 huts holding, sir. Minor leaks, nothing structural. The design is working exactly as intended. The arch shape is deflecting the wind. As long as our foundation bolts hold, we're good. And if the bolts don't hold?" Webb sipped the scalding coffee, feeling it burn down his throat. "Then we've got bigger problems than leaky roofs, sir." The storm raged for 6 hours. 6 hours of constant battering, of wind that shook the buildings like a dog with a toy. Of rain that came not in drops but in solid sheets of water. 6 hours during which Webb and his team rotated through the huts, tightening bolts that had worked loose from vibration, patching leaks, reinforcing anything that showed the slightest weakness. And through it all, the medical staff worked. Surgeries continued. Wounds were treated. Medications administered. The hospital functioned through the storm, protected by corrugated steel and engineering principles, performing miracles of medicine while nature performed demonstrations of raw power outside. At 1,347 hours, the wind suddenly dropped. The roar diminished to a murmur. Rain slackened to a drizzle. Light, actual sunlight, broke through the clouds in golden shafts. Webb opened the door of Hut 1 and stepped outside. The clearing was devastated. Trees down everywhere. Equipment scattered and smashed. The area where the old tent hospital had stood was completely wiped clean, as if a giant hand had swept everything away. Supply crates were overturned, contents spilled and ruined. But the 4 Quonset huts stood intact. Battered, yes. Dinged and dented, absolutely. But standing. Functional. Victorious over the storm. "Would you look at that," Kowalski breathed beside him. "We built something that lasted." "We built something that mattered," Webb corrected. Commander Harrison emerged from Hut 2, blinking in the sudden sunlight. He surveyed the damage, then looked at the 4 standing buildings. His expression was complex: relief, satisfaction, something that might have been awe. "In the entire history of this war," Harrison said slowly, "I don't think there's been a more successful example of emergency construction. You took an impossible situation, an impossible deadline, impossible conditions, and you made it work." "How?" Webb thought about the answer. "How did you explain determination? How did you describe the human capacity to push beyond limits when lives depended on it?" "The design was good, sir," he finally said. "The arch shape, the corrugated steel, the standardized components, it was all brilliant engineering. We just had to trust it. Trust that someone smarter than us had figured out the physics. Our job was execution, not innovation." "Don't sell yourself short," Harrison said. "Innovation is figuring out how to apply solutions to new problems. You took a design meant for Rhode Island and made it work in a Pacific typhoon. That's innovation." "If you say so, sir." They spent the rest of the day on cleanup and improvements. The medical facilities needed refinement, better ventilation, more organized supply storage, improved lighting. Webb's crews worked inside the huts now, no longer fighting mud and weather, just dealing with normal construction challenges. It felt like luxury. By evening, all 4 huts were fully operational as hospital wards. Wounded men had been moved from the ruins of the old tent facility into clean, dry beds in weatherproof buildings. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Soldiers who'd been listless and feverish in the mud were alert and recovering in the new facilities. The infection rate, which had been climbing steadily, began to drop. Commander Phillips took Webb aside as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for a war zone. "I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, Phillips said. "I've worked in hospitals from Boston to San Diego. And I have to tell you, Chief, these buildings you've built, these simple metal huts, are better than most field hospitals I've seen. The temperature stays moderate because the metal radiates heat. The curved walls make airflow natural, reducing hot spots. The lack of corners makes sanitation easier. It's like someone designed these specifically for medical use." "They were designed for flexibility, sir," Webb replied. "That's the genius of it. Same building can be a hospital, a barracks, a warehouse, whatever you need. The shape doesn't care. It just provides shelter." "Shelter," Phillips repeated. "Such a simple word for such a profound thing. You know how many lives you saved today? The storm didn't kill anyone, sir. You and your corpsmen did that." "No. I mean long term. Before these huts, our infection mortality rate was running about 15%. Wounded men who should have lived were dying because we couldn't keep them clean and dry. Now," Phillips gestured at the 4 gleaming buildings, "I'd bet money our mortality rate drops to maybe 5%, possibly lower. Over the course of this campaign, that could be hundreds of lives saved. Hundreds of men who'll go home to their families instead of getting buried in a foreign jungle. Because you built 4 buildings." Webb didn't know what to say to that. The magnitude was too large, too abstract. He'd been focused on immediate problems, bolts and panels and foundations, not on statistical lives saved. "Thank you, sir," he finally managed. "I should be thanking you." Phillips turned to go, then paused. "By the way, Colonel asked me to pass along that you're being awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. Him and Commander Harrison both put in the paperwork." "That's not necessary, sir. It's already done. Get used to it. You're a hero, Chief Webb, whether you like it or not." After Phillips left, Webb stood alone outside Hut 1, watching the stars emerge in the clearing sky. A hero. The word felt wrong, oversized, like wearing someone else's uniform. He'd just done his job. His men had just done their jobs. They'd built buildings because buildings needed building. Retrites continue, but maybe that was what heroism was, in the end. Not dramatic gestures or brave speeches, but simply doing the work that needed doing, pushing past exhaustion and fear and impossible odds because the alternative was unacceptable. Kowalski emerged from Hut 3, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Chief. Got a minute?" "Always." "What's up?" "The men want to know what's next. We've got the hospital built, but we're still a construction battalion. There's an entire island that needs infrastructure." Webb pulled out the assignment sheet Harrison had given him that afternoon. Even in paradise, or hell, depending on perspective, there was always more work. "Tomorrow we start on barracks for the incoming Marine Battalion. Same Quonset design, but configured for housing instead of medical. After that, supply warehouses. Then an expanded mess facility. Then ammunition storage. Then..." "I get it. The list never ends." "No," Webb agreed. "It doesn't. But now we know we can do it. We've proven the concept. 4 buildings in 24 hours, under combat conditions, through a typhoon. Everything else is going to seem easy by comparison." "You actually believe that?" Webb looked at the 4 Quonset huts, light spilling from their windows, the sound of voices inside, living voices, healing voices. "Yeah. I do. We figured out the system. Now it's just repetition." Part 4, The Legacy. Scene 12, 6 weeks later. By December 1943, the Guadalcanal construction site had been transformed. Where once there had been jungle and mud, now stood an orderly grid of Quonset huts. 24 of them now, arranged in neat rows. 4 for the hospital. 8 for barracks. 6 for supply storage. 3 for mess and recreation. 2 for command and administration. 1 for equipment maintenance. Webb stood on a small rise overlooking the site, smoking one of Kowalski's cigarettes despite never having been a smoker before the war. The view was remarkable, a small city of metal rainbows, all identical in their curved simplicity, all weatherproof and solid and functional. "Productive, aren't we?" Commander Harrison said, climbing up beside him. "The design makes it easy, sir. Once we got the first 4 done, trained the crews, worked out the logistics, now we can put up a hut in about 8 hours with a team of 6. 8 hours versus the 24 it took for the first one. Experience is a hell of a teacher." Harrison was quiet for a moment, surveying his domain. The hospital huts were bustling with activity. The daily influx of wounded from operations up the island chain kept the facility at near capacity. But the mortality rate had indeed dropped dramatically. Phillips had been right, clean, dry, weatherproof shelter made an enormous difference in recovery rates. "I got orders this morning," Harrison said. "We're being reassigned." Webb felt his stomach drop. "Sir?" "Not us specifically. The Quonset Hut program. Navy Bureau of Yards and Docks has seen our results here. They want to standardize this across the Pacific. Every island we take, first priority is getting Quonset Huts erected. Hospital first, then barracks, then logistics. They're calling it rapid deployment infrastructure." "That's good news, sir." "It's excellent news. It means what we've done here, what you've done, is being recognized as a fundamental shift in how we conduct military operations. We can project power faster because we can house and supply troops faster. It's logistics revolution, Chief." Webb took a drag on the cigarette, coughed, decided he still didn't like smoking. "So what happens to us? We're the proof of concept. The success story. Which means..." Harrison pulled out a folder thick with papers. "We're being sent to train other CB battalions in Quonset Hut construction. 2 weeks in Noumea, running workshops. Then probably the Philippines when MacArthur retakes them. Then Iwo Jima. Then Okinawa. Wherever the Navy needs infrastructure built fast, we'll be there teaching people how to do what we did here. We're becoming instructors. You're becoming the expert, Webb. Whether you want it to be or not." Harrison handed him the folder. "That's the training curriculum I've been working on. Based on your techniques, your problem solving, your innovations. I want you to review it, make changes, add anything I've missed." Webb opened the folder, scanning the pages. It was all there: foundation preparation in soft ground, rib assembly techniques, panel installation sequences, end wall construction, weatherproofing, interior configuration. Detailed diagrams. Step-by-step procedures. Troubleshooting guides. "This is comprehensive, sir. It needs to be. We're about to teach this to thousands of men. Can't afford mistakes." Harrison paused. "There's something else. The program's being expanded. They're developing new Quonset variants, larger ones, smaller ones, specialized configurations. There's talk of a 40-foot wide model for aircraft hangars. A 20-foot model for small storage. Even an interconnected system where you can attach multiple huts together to create larger facilities." Webb's engineer brain immediately started working on the possibilities. Modular construction. You could build an entire base from standardized components, all fitting together like Lego blocks, one of the designers called them. I don't know what that means, but apparently it's a Danish toy that involves interlocking pieces. The principle is sound. Standardized components, infinite configurations. Webb was getting excited despite his exhaustion. You could ship these anywhere, assemble them in any combination needed for the specific mission. Medical facility here, barracks there, supply depot there, all from the same basic building blocks. Now you're thinking like a systems engineer. Harrison smiled. That's exactly what the Navy wants. And you're going to help make it happen. Scene 13, the classroom. The training facility in Noumea was a far cry from the mud and chaos of Guadalcanal. Real buildings, actual classrooms, even a demonstration site where trainee crews could practice assembly under controlled conditions. Webb stood in front of 40 Seabees from various battalions, feeling profoundly uncomfortable. He was a builder, not a teacher. Give him a blueprint and materials, he'd construct anything. Ask him to explain it to others, and suddenly words became difficult. Okay, he started, then cleared his throat. Okay. Quonset Huts. Who here has seen one? About half the hands went up. Who's assembled one? 2 hands stayed up. Right. Well, you're about to become experts. Webb pulled down the demonstration panel he'd prepared, a cross-section diagram of a Quonset hut showing the arch ribs, purlins, panels, and foundation. The key principle is the arch. Anyone know why arches are strong? A young kid in the front row, reminded Webb of Miller, raised his hand. Because the weight goes down the sides instead of straight down? Close enough. An arch converts vertical load into lateral thrust. The weight pushes down, but the curved channels that force along the arch to the foundation points. It's why cathedrals use them, why bridges use them, why the Romans used them 2,000 years ago. Basic physics, but it works. He spent the next hour walking them through the theory, using diagrams and models. The curved shape and wind resistance. The corrugated steel and structural rigidity. The modular design and flexibility. The simplicity that made it possible to assemble without heavy equipment or specialized training. Then came the practical portion. Team 1, you're with me at Assembly Site A. We're going to build a complete hut, start to finish, just like you'll be doing in the field. I'll walk you through each step, explain the why behind the how, and by the end you'll be able to do this in your sleep. They moved to the outdoor site, where a full set of Quonset components was laid out on pallets. Webb divided them into crews: foundation team, rib assembly team, panel team, finishing team. First mistake people make, he said, is rushing the foundation. You think the metal building is the important part, so you skimp on the foundation work. Wrong. Foundation is everything. If your foundation settles unevenly, your entire structure will twist. Panels will leak, doors won't close, the whole thing becomes a disaster. So we do foundations right, even if it takes extra time. He showed them the techniques his crew had developed on Guadalcanal. How to assess ground stability. How to excavate to solid substrate. How to install foundation plates level and square. How to anchor them securely. The trainees worked under his supervision, making mistakes, learning from them, gradually developing the muscle memory and judgment that came from experience. Johnson, what are you doing with that bolt? Tightening it, Chief. You're over-tightening it. See how the metal's starting to dimple? That's stress concentration. That's a future failure point. Tight enough to hold, not so tight you crush the material. Feel the resistance, back off half a turn. There, perfect. They assembled the first rib together, Webb calling out each step, explaining the reasoning. When they lifted it vertical, there was a collective intake of breath, the same reaction Webb had had the first time, that moment of witnessing something impossible become real. It's like a skeleton coming to life, someone murmured. Exactly, Webb agreed. You're building a skeleton first, then putting skin on it. Keep that mental model and you'll never get confused about the sequence. By the end of the day, they had a complete Quonset hut standing at Assembly Site A. Not perfect, there were gaps and some panel overlaps, one end wall was slightly out of square, the door didn't hang quite right, but it was standing, it was functional, and the crew had built it themselves. Tomorrow, Webb told them, we do it again. But faster. And better. And we fix the mistakes from today. By the end of the week, you'll be able to assemble one of these in 8 hours, working efficiently, making no critical errors. By the end of your deployment, you'll be doing it in 6 hours while half drunk and under enemy fire. Nervous laughter. I'm not joking. On Guadalcanal, we assembled 4 of these in 24 hours during a typhoon while Japanese bombers were trying to kill us. If we could do that, you can handle anything the war throws at you. Scene 14, Letters from the Field. Over the following months, as Webb and his team traveled from base to base training construction battalions, letters started arriving. Reports from the field, from crews who'd taken the training and put it into practice. Commander Harrison collected them, sharing the interesting ones with Webb during their rare quiet moments. From Construction Battalion 71, Tarawa. Erected 6 Quonset huts in the first 48 hours after securing the island. Immediate impact on operations. Having weatherproof storage for ammunition and food meant we could stockpile for the next assault without worrying about tropical storms. Recommend this become standard operating procedure for all amphibious operations. From Medical Officer Henderson. Inuitak. The difference is remarkable. Before Quonsets, we were losing surgical patients to post-op infections at an unacceptable rate. After moving into proper facilities, infection rates dropped by nearly 60%. The ability to maintain sterile conditions in a field hospital is saving lives daily. Request additional units for expansion. From Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, Paliliu. Japanese artillery hit our supply depot on the 3rd day. Destroyed half our tent storage. The Quonset huts took direct hits from shrapnel but remained functional. We lost some supplies from penetrations, but the buildings themselves were reparable within hours. Traditional tent storage would have been complete loss. Structural integrity of these huts under combat conditions is exceptional. Webb read them in his quarters, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Each letter represented lives saved, missions enabled, small victories in the larger war. The Quonset huts he'd helped build and taught others to build were spreading across the Pacific like steel mushrooms, creating pockets of civilization in the chaos of war. You should be proud, Harrison told him after reading a particularly effusive report from a hospital commander in Saipan. You've changed how we fight this war. I just built some buildings, sir. No, you did more than that. You proved that rapid deployment infrastructure isn't just possible, it's essential. Before this, we'd take an island and spend weeks setting up proper facilities. Men living in tents, supplies exposed to weather, hospitals operating in primitive conditions. Now, we can have a functional base operational in days. That's a force multiplier. That's strategic advantage. Webb wasn't sure about strategy, but he understood impact. He'd seen wounded men recovering in clean beds instead of dying in mud. He'd seen supplies protected from typhoons instead of ruined by rain. He'd seen exhausted soldiers sleeping in dry barracks instead of soggy tents. Small things, maybe. But small things added up. Scene 15, The Engineer's Reflection. In March 1944, Webb found himself back in the States for the first time in over a year. 2 weeks of leave before shipping out to train crews for the Philippines campaign. He visited his family in Brooklyn, mother, 2 sisters, nephews he barely recognized. They'd grown so much. They treated him like a hero, which made him uncomfortable. He was just a construction worker who'd learned to work faster. On his last day of leave, he took the subway out to Quonset Point, Rhode Island. The place where it all started, where someone in 1941 had looked at a British Nissan hut and thought, we can do better. The Quonset Point Naval Air Station was enormous, sprawling across hundreds of acres. And everywhere Webb looked, there were Quonset huts. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They'd become the standard building for everything from barracks to workshops to storage facilities. He found the design section and asked to speak with whoever had designed the original hut. A secretary directed him to a small office where a balding man in his 50s was bent over drafting table, working on what looked like ventilation improvements. "Mr. Merrill?" The man looked up, squinting through thick glasses. "That's me. Otto Merrill. Can I help you?" "Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, sir. I wanted to. I'm not sure exactly. Thank you, I guess. For designing the Quonset Hut?" Merrill's face lit up. "You've built them? In the field?" "Yes, sir. Guadalcanal, and I've been training other battalions. Built dozens of them, taught hundreds of men to build more." "Sit, sit." Merrill gestured enthusiastically to a chair. "Tell me everything. How are they holding up? What problems are you encountering? What improvements would you suggest?" For the next 2 hours, Webb described his experiences. The assembly challenges. The weather performance. The combat durability. The modifications crews had developed in the field. Merrill listened intently, taking notes, asking detailed questions about structural behavior and material performance. "This is invaluable," Merrill said finally. "We design these things here in Rhode Island.